Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. We are your hosts, Dr. Scott Hoy, clinical psychologist,
and Kyle Miller, licensed counselor. Psychology Talk is a unique conversation about psychology around the globe. We speak with psychology experts to keep you informed about current issues and trends. We advocate toward reducing stigma and educate about mental health.
While you're listening, please take a moment to give us a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, or your favorite streaming service. It helps us to continue providing you with quality programming. And now, enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Dr. Scott Hoy. Today my guest is Dr. Beau River. Beau is a consulting psychologist with Vantage Leadership Consulting. He and the firm focus on executive coaching, assessment, succession planning, team effectiveness, and high potential leadership development. Today we will be discussing his journey into the consulting world, the current COVID pandemic, and the future of work. Beau, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott. It's been a very long time since anyone called me doctor, so I'm flattered.
That's okay. Beau works. I always say, don't call me late for lunch. That's the best thing, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you for having me, Scott.
Our pleasure. Absolutely. Pleasure all ours. So just to be open about this, Beau and I know each other from the hallowed halls of the Adler University back when it was called the Adler School of Professional Psychology. Beau is clinically based. I know that because I think we might have even had classes or met each other in the library when I worked in their library years ago as a grad student. And he's not doing clinical work now. So we like to open up the floor to let people kind of talk about their journey, as I was mentioning early. And in this case, I'm kind of curious as to how you jumped ship, so to speak, from clinical work over to consulting work. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's funny. I spent a good chunk of my life, as you did, Scott, getting going through very rigorous coursework and dissertation, and all to get a piece of paper from the state of Illinois that said I could counsel people, and then I've never used it. I transitioned right after my postdoc to consulting, but my journey to the consulting really starts before Adler. I, as you may remember, Scott was a professional squash player before grad school, and played on the U.S. team and traveled the world on the world tour, and just had a fantastic adventure, both competing and meeting people around the world that shared a passion for the game, and also learning about sort of the inner game of squash and the rigors of creating a robust psychological performance on court, and managing the sort of day in and day out stress of training, and ultimately trying to be at one's best and freshest and most alert for competition. And so through the kind of 5 years of full-time competitive play that I did, the inner game and the psychology of the game and sports psychology in general became increasingly interesting to me. And I wish I could tell you, Scott, that I had this, well thought out plan to find my way into psychology. It really was not like that. I sort of woke up one day and decided that I was going to go to grad school and I was going to become a psychologist. And I started researching programs because I just didn't sort of feel like a career in squash would sort of be the right fit for me. It was a great journey and a great community that I'm still connected with. But I was interested in pursuing other things. And so I dove into coursework at Adler. And really a turning point for me was our second year. I read this article that sort of basically, in summary, said that remission of symptoms of depression and anxiety, and generally, people not feeling good psychologically, remission of all of that did not equate to health. That being psychologically healthy was a completely separate set of quote unquote symptoms or patterns that developed over time, not unlike symptoms, of pathology. And they were cultivated in different ways, and they had different implications for people's lives. And that really sort of turned a switch in my head and was like, oh my gosh, we're learning a lot about the way people suffer and the way people become depressed and anxious, psychotic, and have, challenges thinking. And we're not learning too much about this other half of the human continuum, loosely defined as positive psychology, or in this article described it as symptoms of hedonia, symptoms of just feeling great, being engaged, flourishing, developing. And so that was a turning point for me. And I really loved the clinical study and all of the training that we did through practicum. But I also decided that I wanted to be a clinician that knew how to help people develop those symptoms of hedonia, those symptoms of engagement and flourishing and development in their lives and ultimately their work. That was sort of one turning point. And the other turning point was just the philosophical base that we started with at Adler, with the writings and teachings of Alfred Adler, who's defined as, the first community psychologist, the first person who thought about psychology as a group dynamic and not an individual dynamic, and really sort of pioneered the space of helping communities flourish and develop. And so those two together were really the starting point for my journey towards consulting. There's a whole area of psychology called industrial organizational psychology, which strictly focuses on the working frame and people's working lives and organizational design and measurement, statistical measurement of intelligence or performance in some way. So I didn't get trained in that side of things like some of my colleagues did, but I essentially designed my own sort of coursework in this, sort of area of positive psychology. And so anytime a professor would assign us a term paper and the topic was open, I would research it's sort of broadly based a positive psychology topic.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Okay.
And that was sort of the starting point. I just started building my knowledge of that space and looking at sports psychology, looking at positive psychology, looking at operational psychology, which is the use of psychology in the military, and just kind of building my knowledge there. And I ended up doing a positive psychology dissertation. I looked at a topic called flow, which is loosely defined as optimal human functioning in a given task. And that was a big part of my pre-doctoral internship, was thinking about that, as I was also working with veterans in a combined VA, DOD hospital, mostly doing PTSD work. And then in my postdoc, I got the pleasure of doing some more organizational work in the hospital and looking at a patient-centered care initiative and how effectively it was being rolled out and how it was being adopted by doctors and nurses and administrators. And that sort of in totality just really motivated me to look more deeply at sort of what was out there in terms of jobs in this space. And I literally, through my clinical CV at a firm called RHR International, which pioneered the space of helping clinicians transition to the business space and apply our skill sets to businesses. And I was very fortunate to get hired by them. So I went from working with veterans out in North Chicago at the James A. Lovell Federal Healthcare Center in June or July of 2012 to a few short weeks later working at the top of the Willis Tower in an executive suite, talking to leaders about their businesses. And it was a big head spin to go from clinical postdoc to the consulting world, but it's been just a fantastic journey the last 8 years. I transitioned to Vantage Leadership Consulting about 6 years ago, and I've really found a home in our firm. We're a mix of folks with background in clinical and counseling psychology, and also a heavy bent of heavy population, I should say, of IO psychologists. And we just do really impactful, fun work, and it's a pleasure to have landed in our firm.
Wow. Okay, that is quite a trajectory. What I'm hearing though is, you might not recall, but I had a background in performing arts and visual arts before.
That's right.
I went into psychology, so my trajectory was working in the area of hypnosis, and of course, my dissertation was on creativity and hypnosis. Now, why would I mention that? Because a lot of people. Csikszentmihalyi, who developed that flow idea, was actually very, very well trained in things like hypnosis, and he worked with Jet Cells on a very large study on creativity, the creative genius. So we should also say that his grad students probably did a lot of work for both of them as well. But the flow idea is very synonymous with absorption, which is connected to the idea of creativity. And I believe that Csikszentmihalyi gave it a more generic term simply because it's harder to sell creativity to people outside of, visual and performing arts or plastic arts or things like that. But it is kind of the same thing. And I actually quoted him quite a bit in my dissertation as well.
Yeah. And I would say, that would probably be a different sell today. The current business environment, and not only COVID, but what's being called by many business scholars the fourth great industrial revolution in the business landscape and in the marketplace of technology and AI, is really, really challenging leaders and businesses to think creatively about their organizations, about how they develop leaders, and ultimately about their business model in order to just effectively compete. I was looking up some information related to this, and one of the interesting findings that I stumbled upon is that from 1955 until 2015, that span of time, the Fortune 500 that was the 500 most valuable companies circa 1955, only about 12% of them are still around today, which is sort of a staggering statistic if you think about it. The most valuable companies in the wealthiest country in the world, 88% of them are gone, divested, spun off, merged. And so, if anything, the disruption of businesses is only accelerated. That timeline of disruption in the sort of the early years of this study, years after 1955, was about a 30-year timeline to stay in the Fortune 500. There's estimates that timeline now is down around 12 years that businesses stay in the Fortune 500. So incredibly competitive dynamics, and all a long-winded way to say, the work of flow and creativity and Csikszentmihalyi is just very relevant right now, and as are the psychological sciences right now in the business space. They're becoming, I think, anecdotally, increasingly integral to business success, fundamentally because people are driving these businesses and making decisions day in and day out that affect the long-term success of organizations.
Yeah, well, I think that younger generations are. I think there's less of a stratified place where you can niche yourself for 30 or 40 years in a career. And also, that's one factor I think involved, probably because of this, the shifting sands of the business world, and that 80% or so of people, of companies being merged or going out of business, or, it is a changing landscape. But also, I think that millennials and younger folks are, the so-called Gen Zs, I think they're more interested in having a quality of life, not just quantity of things in life.
Yes, absolutely. The research on Gen Y and Gen Z around what attracts them and what retains them to an employer is pretty clear. Flexibility in terms of work-life balance and ability to work from home, which this is pre-COVID research. Now it's ubiquitous. Was certainly near the top, but the most consistent finding in multiple rounds of research over many years with the Gen Y population and now being echoed by the Gen Z population is a desire to have a developmental experience in the workplace, i.e., not only formal training opportunities, but also having leaders that invest time and energy in their development, meaning beyond annual or biannual review where a person gets feedback on their performance, the desire to have regular feedback to understand how they're performing, understand where there needs to be growth or a different approach, and also understand what they're doing really well is a strong motivator for people generally under about the age of 40 entering the workforce. And an additional sort of statistic on that I find very compelling is that there are approximately 10,000 boomer generation folks retiring a day. In total, that is adding up to an estimated rise of Gen Y and Gen Z becoming about 80% of the U.S. workforce in the next 5 years. So when we put all that data together, what does it mean? It means you've got a group of people that are incredibly focused on development, incredibly focused on having leaders who invest in their development, coach them, and joining organizations where there's a focus on training and development as a core offering. And that desire is going to be embedded in 80+% of the U.S. workforce. So an important cautionary sort of, not cautionary, an important focus area for organizations, and even in bigger sort of learning and takeaway for leaders. Leaders who are not developing their own coaching skills, their own ability to invest and develop talent and promote the abilities of their people, in our view, are going to be fundamentally irrelevant to the consumers of their leadership. They're not going to be as valuable.
Okay. So lots of big changes going on here.
Yes.
But I kind of want to segue here. COVID, of course, has just driven things into remote work, which maybe we were headed in that direction anyway, because of these preferences of Gen Y and Gen Z, maybe a little bit. I mean, but also I do know that from running my own clinic, teletherapy has just been, I had no problem doing that. I was seeing clients in, I was seeing a lot of expats or people in South Africa or the Emirates. With that, I was doing distance remote therapy with people who couldn't come in or whatnot. So I was used to the platform, not a big shift for me, although I did miss the human contact with my patients in my clinic. Sure. But that has been basically 10 years of change has happened overnight with that. And I think the same thing could be said of remote work, but you're more of the expert on the workforce in general. So what do you think is happening with COVID and the workplace?
Well, I would echo a lot of what you said, Scott. I think overall there was a solid move in U.S.-based organizations. At least that's where I have more experience, but we have a number of global clients. So this, I think, is true globally. that the move towards greater autonomy for a workforce to fit their working responsibilities in flexibly with their life, rather than a work-life balance, a work-life integration.
Okay, so really, just to stop you for a second there, do you think that is that one of the markers of what the so-called Gen Y, Gen Z folks are interested in?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is it's actually forwarding what was going to be happening anyway, and if there's a positive thing that can come out of what's happening, maybe that's one thing, a tectonic shift. But
yeah, and I think ultimately this has been a huge case study evaluation of whether a remote workforce can be effective. And from my understanding of the research and our experience with our clients, the clients that have been, the businesses that have been disrupted because of COVID were not disrupted because they had to move their workforce to a remote setting. They were disrupted because their business model went out the window. You know, the travel industry is generally in a state of free fall, including, airlines, hotels, organizations whose businesses are built around the travel industry are really struggling because the volume of the business has significantly decreased. That is not due to their workforce being remote. So in the businesses that we work with and the research I'm familiar with, any organization whose business model has remained viable and intact through the COVID pandemic has not seen any significant changes in workforce productivity. And in fact, from what I understand, there's even been some upticks, right? Because if people were spending 1 to 2 hours a day commuting, that is changed if they're going to their living room or den or office to work rather than moving their bodies distances. There is, I think, probably going to be some change in that reality due to our current sort of schooling system and schooling being done remotely, kids being at home, parents having to juggle, helping kids be online and doing tutoring. So I think there's a little bit of a TBD around workforce productivity with the launch of the school year. But in general, the takeaway that many business leaders who are relatively entrenched, Scott, around the need for people to come in, they got to be here, we got to be monitoring them, we got to sort of have our hands on what they're doing. The takeaway is actually we don't. And when you give people the trust and autonomy and ownership of their work remotely, 9.8 times out of 10. You get some very good results.
Wow. So this is actually a positive thing for the workforce in general, you would say?
Well, it's hard, Scott, to say much of anything related to COVID is positive. Certainly there are silver linings. Okay. I think the silver lining collectively for corporate America and organizations at large is that with the right structure, expectations, support, you can have a workforce that does not come into a centralized office. I think there will be a decrease in corporate office footprints, but I don't think corporate offices are going away. The only caveat to that, Scott, is the sort of topic of corporate culture. Our view on organizational culture is that when it is palpable, when it is clear, when leaders embody it in everything they do, it is a differentiating performance enhancer. But doing all of that takes a lot of work, a lot of focus, and a lot of commitment, and a lot of accountability. Organizations like, let's say, Southwest Airlines that have such clear values around caring for the customer, or NASA that have such clear values around innovation and excellence. It's everything they do. They live and they breathe it day in and day out. So accomplishing that remotely and imparting those norms, because essentially culture is a set of behavioral norms that guide performance, right? So imparting those in a remote environment is a little bit of an ongoing experiment. And how do organizations impart that is an experiment too.
Okay. Well, so you're talking about missions and values here and rolling those out. And really, like you mentioned, Southwest and NASA and other organizations that have such clear-cut values and mission statements. Yes. How are you as a consultant seeing your work rolling out with leadership in keeping these things defined?
Great question, Scott. I would say fundamentally our work with organizations ultimately serves a few goals. Number one, helping up the leadership sophistication in organizations and ultimately the skill of leaders so that leadership as a whole, and that's not just the CEO, but leadership in organizations that we partner with is a differentiating advantage. They are able to more successfully operate their business with a more efficient, a more cohesive structure. And ultimately what we think about a lot is how do we create a set of experiences and processes that create a people strategy, a strategy for developing and aligning people that drives the business strategy and really connects people to the business strategy so they can make it win, essentially. The way that we do that can take a lot of different forms, but fundamentally as psychologists, what we are, in the words of our managing partner, weirdly good at is assessing leaders, assessing people's current capabilities in a given role in comparison to a leadership competency model or other factors that have been determined for success in a given role or a given level in the organization, and their ability or potential to scale into a larger, more sophisticated, broader leadership responsibility in the future.
Okay.
Those are the fundamental two things that we assess, day in and day out.
And if you can do that, you're kind of tracking their trajectory as they move along in their work.
Yeah, and we also consistently assess a person's ability to both operate within and be an exemplar of the organization's culture. Okay. So those three things we are evaluating leaders around day in and day out. And essentially what we are able to do with that is to build a real-time composite of the leadership talent in an organization, number one. Number two, we're also assessing for where their abilities are a tight fit with their current responsibilities and future responsibilities, and also where there's gaps. Where does this individual or this group of individuals at a level need to have different or new learning, new skill development, new perspective taking at a more senior level in the organization versus, a more junior level, et cetera. Yeah, so fundamentally, when we evaluate leaders, we are evaluating not only their strengths, but we're evaluating their development opportunities, their gaps, and the things that they need to learn or work on to be more effective in their current role and in a future more senior level position. And so we are really able to be very targeted with our executive coaching practice and building the learning plans and the experiences and the conversations, that help leaders fundamentally grow. And that's really our second focus area is executive and leadership coaching. We're usually working at the, more executive levels, but we're certainly also very involved with leaders just below the executive level, helping them grow their readiness to step into an executive level role. And our coaching conversations can take a lot of different forms, but fundamentally what we're trying to do is accelerate a person's talents, accelerate a person's readiness a little faster, a lot faster in some cases, than they would be able to do if left to their own devices. And that can have a number of benefits for organizations. First and foremost, related to the current COVID situation, succession planning has become a real focus area. Succession planning is defined by getting leaders ready for senior level roles, if not C-suite level roles, CEO, CFO, CHRO, sooner rather than later has taken on a real sense of urgency in the COVID crisis. Because what happens if a group of our senior leaders, gets sick? I mean, Scott, you and I woke up today to the news that President Trump got COVID, right? Yeah. There's some very serious implications for organizations when their senior leaders are not able to perform.
Correct. And well, yeah, that's an even scarier prospect. It's a national security issue.
Yes.
It has an effect. It's had an effect on the stock market today. So these are all, I mean, this is why it's so important, the role of psychology within leadership positions in business, because that's going to shift where liquidity goes. It's going to shift where capital goes and how we make decisions on large scales in society. One of the things one of the reasons I contacted you was because you do blog on LinkedIn. Just a plug for your LinkedIn blog.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, which is really interesting. I'm kind of checking that out from time to time. But you had a really intriguing article on AI and the future of work. And I know a lot of people have been coming out, like Andrew Yang and others, saying that AI is going to replace things. It's going to displace people from the workplace. But I don't think you really have that negative of an opinion of AI. I think you're going to see that, especially with COVID. I think you mentioned that AI is going to be more influential in how people do work in a positive way.
Well, hey, I'm familiar with some of the thought process of Elon Musk and other technology leaders that are very concerned about the future of AI and its ability to be weaponized. And I certainly don't minimize that concern and risk. Coming into the world of work, there certainly will be elements of AI that automate jobs today that are performed by humans. In the future, those jobs will be done by machines or machine learning or an algorithm of some sort. So I don't want to minimize some of the challenges. The optimism that I have in coming away from a dystopian view of the future and coming to an optimistic view of the future is that AI, machine learning, and associated technology, specifically virtual reality technology, holographic imaging, and conferencing technology, have the ability, especially in a world racked by a global pandemic, to create greater intimacy, professional intimacy, through a digital platform. So in the article that you referenced, I took a deep dive into the emerging learning technology and adult learning theory that was being used to build some future tools. And what I learned and wrote about was a pretty hopeful use of virtual reality ultimately as an empathy builder, which really surprised me and gave me a lot of hope. Because we hear so much about the dangers of AI and the ability for it to be weaponized and misused. There's some very interesting research, specifically coming out of some scholars from Stanford, that looked at virtual reality as a means to fundamentally shift one's personal perspective. We haven't talked a lot about the related social unrest in the wake of George Floyd's and others' murder. But clearly, collectively, we would all benefit from some more empathy and fundamentally defining empathy as the ability to walk in someone else's shoes and see the world and events through someone else's eyes. Virtual reality and emerging software platforms that are powering it have the ability to shift ourselves out of the subjective personal lens and into this sense of the other.
Yeah, and I just kind of interrupt here briefly. If I recall, a few years ago, I was reading about a virtual reality program, a platform that allowed clinicians and trainees especially to have the experience of what it would be like to have florid schizophrenia, or right? Yeah. Which is really an empathic kind of training method to show people and kind of step back and help the clinicians and help even family members and others interested, with friends or people touched by that disease, how to better understand what they're going through and connect with them.
Exactly, Scott. I actually did a demo of that software, and there was it was a full experience. I remember there being a sense. There's olfactory stimulation, visual, and auditory. And this is, back when I was a clinical trainee in the VA, so almost a decade ago. So bringing that sort of same basic premise to a very different setting, i.e. the world of work and the world of businesses and the world of organizations, has powerful consequences or powerful outcomes. Fundamentally, in creating that same level of empathy you described for a clinician trying to understand the experience of a psychotic patient, to how do I understand how to collaborate with this team? What are their focus areas? What are they focused on in the business? What are their concerns? What can I offer in terms of an experience that they could have that would bring them into my business priorities, my team's focus, and ultimately just create more mutual understanding, with the hope and belief that with those levels of mutual understanding, we could identify a mutually beneficial solution of some sort that ultimately served the business, served our customers, served the people who are in our businesses having to interact with each other day in and day out.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So how do you see that? What platforms do you see possibly being rolled out in business ways?
Well, certainly VR, as I've talked about, from a conferencing standpoint, there's some very provocative applications for a bit like Star Wars, when a holograph, a three-dimensional holograph was beamed across the galaxy to create conferencing space. We are literally at a place where that technology exists. It's very much in its nascent stages of development. It's still very expensive, but with the advent of 5G technology, that eventually that kind of offering could be offered over our phones through the cellular network, certainly in conferencing centers. And the experience of physically feeling like you are with someone has some significant implications. There was an interesting New York Times article a couple weeks ago, Scott, that basically said we're all a little awkward now because the normal day-to-day experiences of socializing with people is a skill, and we have not worked on that skill as much as we normally work on it for the last 7 months. And lo and behold, we're all a little less skillful socially. We're all a little more awkward in real-life interactions. And so, as a case example, the holographic technology has the ability to create more information across a virtual space. Right now, we are interacting over a video platform where I see a one-dimensional image of your face. There's a lot of social information that gets communicated. Some research would suggest up to 70% of communication is other than the data coming out of my mouth. It's my facial expressions. It's the intonation of my voice. It's my hand language, my body language, and my hand gestures. So the chances of holographic technology being able to impart more of that 70%, certainly not all of it, but more of it than one-dimensional video screens or I should say two-dimensional, right? Two-dimensional video screens, be a weird thing to see ourselves in one dimension, is very powerful, and especially for global organizations that are expecting senior level leadership teams to operate effectively together, to expecting more execution focused or innovation teams to connect over wide distances and innovate new products, new approaches. That could be a subtle yet very important game changer in terms of virtual collaboration.
Yeah, well, I could see that having a great deal of functionality within teletherapy or telepsychology as well, because one of the things I really miss about in-person work, especially since I do a lot of mind-body techniques like hypnosis or biofeedback or mindfulness, is I can't see the reaction as well, right? And I'm seeing a few people in the office now, so when I can pick up on things like, anxiety expressing itself in nervousness with the hands or body gestures, it's much more intimate, and it's more possible for me to work, like you were saying, my own kind of, analog VR, which is seeing a person in front of me rather than a digital VR. I can actually work with that person. And the same thing goes with consulting as well, because a lot of those skills overlap between therapy and consulting. So this is exciting for both of us, and it's also exciting for, I think, workplace settings.
I would totally agree, Scott.
Excellent. Wow. Well, it looks like we're about out of time. We could easily talk more. I know that we had a few technical difficulties today, and my co-host Kyle couldn't be with us. I'm offering, if you want to come back at any point in time, if anything comes up, we're open invitation to come back on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Scott. Well, it's been a real pleasure and honor to talk with you and reconnect. Many years since our deep talks in the library. And,
I know. and getting through that maze of grad school. Well, How can people connect with you outside of the podcast?
Yeah, thank you for asking, Scott. They can go to our website, vantageleadershipconsulting.com, and find us through our website. And we'd love to connect if there's a opportunity to partner around any of the topics or otherwise that we've discussed today.
Okay, excellent. Well, you take care of yourself, be well, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Take good care, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Please take a moment to subscribe to us at Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, or whichever streaming service you use. All material is copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. This show is for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.